Good evening. You're very welcome to our fourth in our series of webinars under the Sensibility Project. My name is Donald Tinney. I'm County Librarian in Sligo, and just on behalf of the Library Service of Roscommon, Sligo and Leitrim, and the we're delighted to welcome Michael Ryan, who's going to talk to us about supporting your neurodiverse and LGBT plus teen. And I'd just like to say that when Michael finishes up, you'll have an opportunity to ask some questions. If you look at the bottom right-hand side of your screen, ask your questions down there, click on that, type in your question, and it's already been asked, and that will get it up the pecking order, and we will ask Michael the question at the end of that. So I hope you enjoy this evening's webinar, and over to you, Michael.
That's great. Thank you very much, Donald. And I'm delighted actually to be asked by the Sligo, Leitrim and Roscommon Libraries to do this talk. And in fact, I was just reflecting on the fact I have given talks on LGBT topics, and I've given talks on topics around autism, but never quite one as specific as this neurodiversity with LGBT plus teens. So I'm just going to share my screen here now, and we get the presentation up. From the beginning. So Donald, you might just let me know that you can see that. That's all okay?
That's fine there, Michael. Yeah, perfect.
Okay, thanks, Ulton. So what we're going to cover this evening then is just a brief introduction to myself, some specific issues and challenges around neurodiversity and LGBTI plus teens, a few tips for supporting those people who are in your life, or indeed for yourself if you're listening in yourself. And then Donald has already mentioned about the questions there in the bottom right hand side of your screen, and if somebody has asked a question before, you can vote on it, and then Ulton at the end will give me a shout and let me know what questions are, I suppose, at the top of the list. I'm from Westmeath, Kilbeggan and Westmeath. I grew up in a hardware store, and initially I went into the hotel business for quite a few years. And then in my mid-30s, decided to have a career shift and needed to do something a little more fulfilling. So I started working for a disability organisation when I went to college to study counselling. Then I ended up working through a number of schools as a counsellor, and of course there I came across a number of students who had autism and other neurodiversities. And that's, I suppose, how I ended up then going down a path of skilling myself up on that whole area. And I'm a gay guy myself, so I'd written a book some time ago. Let's see, yeah, there's the book. And it was called The Complete Guide to Gay Life for New Explorers. Excuse me. And that's really, I suppose, a coming out book for teens. It's not specific about neurodiversity and LGBTI, but it does cover it in the book. So I suppose some common kind of challenges around LGBT issues are the school ground, is where you first kind of learn that being gay or being LGBT is something that, well, certainly in my day, was something you would be mercilessly bullied for and called all the names and all of that. And what happens then is you lose your sense of having free speech, and you become afraid and you almost bully yourself, and internalized homophobia is a huge issue. Because you learn, certainly in the olden days, that, you know, this is against your religion, against your culture, it's against the law, even back before 1993. And so you start to filter everything. So you censor everything you say. And, you know, for fear of kind of being outed or outing yourself, you filter what you say, what you watch, what you wear, what you listen to, how you say it, how you respond to things, what you eat, even what you drink, and where you go and what concerts you go to, and all of those kind of things. And you have to do all of that filtering in the quick space of time before the person that's talking to you realizes you're filtering. And it becomes an exhausting process. If we look at some of the terminology associated with the LGBTI, and look, in some places it'll be LGBT plus, and some it'll be LGBTQ plus, LGBTQIA plus. So whatever sits comfortably for you, and however kind of, I suppose, into it you want to get. So I'm not going to go through all of the terminology there. that sheet on the left-hand side is going to be emailed to everyone after the talk this evening, anyone who's registered for the Sensibility series, because there's an awful lot of words and terms that you might not be familiar with. And somebody who's transgender, non-binary, they might also, on the right-hand side of the screen there, you'll see there are neopronouns. And they are, I suppose, sub-elements of the whole LGBT community. And some people prefer to use those. Now, there's a lot of them there, and you're kind of going, well, why can't it just be he, him, she, her, they, them? That was kind of, we were all getting used to that. But sometimes I kind of think, and there's a lot of, say, the flags are there also, you know, and there's a different flag for every element of the community. And again, you know, I often get a comment from somebody going, why can't it just be straightforward, you know, they, them, and that'll cover everybody? But people's identity is very important, and it'd be like a foreigner, or, well, maybe if Ireland has been represented somewhere and they put up the UK flag to cover us, and they say, well, look, you're close enough. And we'd say, well, actually, no, we have our own flag. And they might say, well, look, on the map, you all look to be fairly close there. Isn't that okay? Or if say, Sligo, we're told, well, here's a Mayo flag. Why don't you just choose that? You're close enough. You get fairly upset about that. So everyone is entitled to their own expression and their own sense of where they're at in the whole journey of gender and sexual orientation. And different people belong to different subsets of the community. So I kind of think a little bit like, you know, that old song, there's so many colors in the rainbow, so many colors in the morning sun. But the song starts off by saying, you know, green hills are green and blue things are blue, and there's no need to see flowers any other way than the way they always have been seen. But there are so many colors in the rainbow. And so I kind of think, why don't we just go with it? It actually doesn't matter to me whether there's 50 genders, 500 genders, or 5,000 genders, or 50 sexualities, or 1,000 sexualities. We wouldn't say we should just have roses and daffodils, and isn't that enough flowers for us? Because we just love the whole diversity of it all. So again, here's some of the main non-binary identities. And again, I'm not going to go through all of them. And that is not an exhaustive list. And if we probably looked at this talk in a year's time, we'd have a whole other set of stuff that comes along, because different people will have different identities. And again, that's up to each individual. And I don't think we should ever limit it. And it's just, you know, if somebody is asking you to identify them in a particular way, well, I think it's not that much difficulty for us to accept that, and to accept whatever gender or identity or sexuality that somebody is identifying as. And people say, well, look, there's just men, ladies and gents toilets. Why do we have to have a separate one? And you know, for the most part, it doesn't affect any of us whether there's 2 or 10 different types of toilets, or why all toilets can't just be gender neutral. But it will take a long time, obviously, for the world to catch up with that. And that's how it's going to be. And only today I was talking to a Portuguese-speaking person. And last week I was talking to a Dutch person. And they were telling me that there's an awful lot of work being done in the translation community. Because if you take, say, in French, everything is given in either male or female gender. And in Portuguese, the same, everything is given a male and female gender. All the words like fenetra for window or door. So one might be male and one might be la fenetra and la porte, I think it is. And they're going to try and gender neutralize all of the terminology. So again, there's just a selection of the flags from the LGBTQIA plus community. And again, if we do this talk in a year's time, there might be another few. So if we look at the bottom left-hand corner there, the second one in, it's called Progress. That's generally one that covers about 10 different genders and sexualities, including the black population who want a different, the African American population want an individual identity within the whole LGBT movement. So things move along all the time. We need to sometimes remind ourselves, of course, that in 76 countries around the world, homosexuality is still punishable by law. And again, if we did this talk in a year's time, that number might go up or the number might go down, or it might shift where the flags are on the globe. Because some countries decriminalize homosexuality and then recriminalize it based on who the next leader or prime minister or whomever comes in. So I think it's useful just to remind ourselves of that. So when we look at people coming out, say teens, the average age of discovery that you're gay is around 11 or 12. Just as soon as puberty hits, you start to figure out that you are attracted to whichever gender that you're attracted to. And then the initial disclosure is in around 15 or 16. And again, that number is coming down actually all the time. And the youngest I've dealt with in terms of certainly identifying a transgender, probably around eight or so in primary school, and sexuality in around 11, so 5th class maybe for that. And so then, you know, neurodiverse teens who are also LGBT, they have a higher prevalence in relation to things like self-harm and suicide compared to other teens. And an unfortunate and stark figure there is about 70% will seriously consider suicide. Not that many actually complete the suicide, but it becomes a very frightening thing that people actually consider it during their teenage life. 4 times more likely to have anxiety and depression than neurotypical teens. And 75%, of course, you know, the whole issue of bullying, violence, verbal and psychological and physical abuse are much more prevalent. And of course, the more, I suppose, for want of a better word, labels. Now, we all know labels are for jars, not for people. But the more labels or identities that we have, the more difficult life can be, because you're dealing with a couple of oppressions at the same time. And a higher prevalence then of substance misuse, school refusal, or school avoidance, I should have put there, and absenteeism. So gender is kind of depicted in a number of different ways for us to try and get our heads around what it's all about and what all this terminology is about. And I'm aware that a lot of people who are looking at this webinar this evening are back on the recording. Some people will be well into the whole, I suppose, community, or very well up on the terminology, and others are just dipping their toes in, and they've just discovered that their child is either ASD or LGBT or transgender, and we've got to be patient. And I suppose there's no such thing as a silly question or the wrong question or the wrong terminology. Everyone understands that when you are unsure about something, everyone should be patient with you as you come to terms with the terminology. So don't be afraid to ask questions, or whether you're going to use the right or wrong language in it. Once your sentiment is meant well, people will generally pick up on that. So again, there's all kinds of different types of scale of gender identity. Perhaps if we look at this one, it's probably a little easier, because in terms of gender identity, you male and female, and then everything in between, and feminine and masculine, and everything in between, at different stages of androgyny in between those two. And then biological sex, you know, people who have genitals where it's obvious they're male or female, but there are some people who are born with indiscriminate genitalia, and sometimes with a version of both, and they would be considered intersex. And usually the medics will examine the person's system in terms of endocrinology, presence or absence of a womb, the blood, the observation of genitals, and they put them on a scale, and then they rate them, and eventually they say that this person is more male than female, and they'll do some reassignment or readjustments. But that does not mean that the person will eventually end up feeling the gender that they've been assigned at birth. And there are other parents who will just let the child grow up with that, I suppose, androgyny in terms of their genitalia or their gender, and let them live their life just as nature has put them on the earth, you know. And the same with sexuality. Then there's, I suppose, a straightforward gay person and a straightforward straight person, and in between everything else, you know, where bisexuality is probably right in the middle, but there's all kinds of other things. And if we went back to the terminology sheet there'd be people who identify as asexual, who don't have a sexual preference. And then there's grey sexual, so you might not have a sexual preference and sexually attracted, but you can be romantic. And so sapiosexual then is somebody who's just attracted to people based on their intelligence as opposed to their gender or their sexuality. So that's all the colours of the rainbow, and that's all the flowers. Alexander Leon had a lovely quote, a sad quote in ways, but probably very true, and certainly people of my age and stage would identify with this. And again, the word queer is used by people in the community where we've reclaimed it, instead of it being a slagging term that we kind of own it, I guess. And he says, queer people don't grow up as ourselves. We grow up playing a version of ourselves that sacrifices authenticity to minimize humiliation and prejudice. The massive task of our adult lives is to unpick which parts of ourselves are truly us and which parts we've created to protect us. And that's again going back to what I was saying before, where you filter everything and you create a persona and you create an identity. And then I didn't come out till I was about 27. So from 12 to 27, then it's quite a long time to have created an inauthentic version of myself. And then you spend the rest of your life trying to pick through what was actually me and what was actually my persona. I'm just going to briefly look at these things. So there's been a lot of research done, and it was just interesting. I felt that it was exactly the same percentage here of, you know, females who feel male and males who feel female, and it was just in around the 1% for both. And then in terms of sexuality, it was slightly higher for females who were attracted to women only at 21%, and men who were attracted to men only at 6%, and men who were attracted to men only at 5%. So there's a slight difference in that one. This is from the As I Am LGBT page, and it just said, throughout our adolescent and maybe young adult years, we explore our sexuality and what it means to us. As we move our way into adulthood, we settle into our sexual and gender identity. And so it's not unusual, you know, to be confused or to be uncertain or to be unsure or even to change as we go along. So it's about being totally comfortable with being you and embracing all the ways and that others might think of you as being different. It is not useful for people to question whether your sexuality is true or not. However, it's okay that you may change how you identify yourself, and you can redefine your gender and sexual orientation. And again, it's nobody else's business. So it's about respecting each other's individuality and uniqueness. And I think that kind of captured a nice kind of way of looking at neurodiversity and LGBT plus, and kind of going, you know, because no teenager kind of knows themselves, and in fact there's a sense that they say we don't really know ourselves till we're about 27. Interestingly, that is the time that I came out, and a lot of other people throughout my life made big changes around 27. So I am starting to believe that that is an actual stage of human development. So reasons why people don't come out, and again, I'm not going to go through all of these. They'll be on the sheets if you want to get them afterwards, and Ulton is going to send them out to the participants. But if you look at this, one of the bigger words that pop up here is fear. So the fear of rejection and bullying and not being believed, and then fears relating to, you know, AIDS, HIV, and all those kind of things to do with sexually transmitted infections. They're afraid of upsetting the people they love, afraid of being disowned, disinherited, afraid of being rejected from, say, their clubs. And I mean, to this day, you can see where not a single current playing, footballer in the Premier League is out or identifies in any way of being LGBT. And in some ways, when you have neurodiversity, you almost have to come out twice in a way. You have to make a choice about whether you come on. There's a lot of synchronicity between the two worlds, and then sometimes for a lot of people those two worlds enmesh with each other. And there's, as I was going through this, because this is the first time I've done this specific talk, it was striking to me just how similar a lot of the challenges are in terms of creating, and you know, with masking for people who are neurodiverse, and masking is a huge element of life to try and fit in and not look different or not act differently. And then of course you get so exhausted masking all day at school. As soon as you get home, you explode, or you melt down, or you're just exhausted, you know. And so it's kind of similar then for people who are masking their sexuality or gender identity. And a lot of stress there. And then, of course, people are unsure who to trust. But things are changing, and changing for the better in society and within schools and families and workplaces. And, you know, thankfully, that's partly to do with the laws changing, and partly to do with attitudes, and partly to do with separation of church and state. And, you know, it is great to see that things are certainly moving in the right direction for us here. But the danger there then is people say, well, look, since that referendum, it's all sorted. The gays are all fine. They can all get married and everything is fine. But the referendum and various other things, and all the transgender legislation that came through, it churns up a whole bunch of stuff in society. It churns up a whole bunch of pain and anger and rejection and masking and hiding, and people who had maybe married somebody of the opposite gender were now, you know, faced with having to discuss issues around sexuality and stuff in canteens, and maybe deal with their own stuff that they never dealt with before. So we're still waiting for all that to settle down. And of course then all families are not as I suppose open to the whole concept. Not all religions are open to the whole concept. And yeah, some countries, as we say, are where it's illegal, you know. So there is better visibility, and like all of the soap operas, all of the things like the Eurovision, okay, that's a bit camp, so maybe it's not fair to say that helps, but certainly, you know, for everyone to get involved in Eurovision, things like that. Movies that will have just mainstream characters who aren't just portrayed as the kind of camp clowns, for want of a better word, that they used to say in the old Are You Being Served kind of series and that kind of stuff, where anybody who's LGBT would be portrayed as very, very camp, or a female would be portrayed as very, very, say, butch or masculine. And thankfully mainstream media is embracing that and just showing people going about their regular lives. So if somebody is going to come out to you, what we say is provide a safe space, you know. So if you're a teacher, maybe you will know a student, if they want to say something, you get a sense if they've asked to have a quiet word, would you please respect and try and make sure that you have a quiet space to take them. And just, you know, be aware that this is a really difficult thing. So in one of the schools, we have small little rainbow magnets that we stick up in the corner of the whiteboards or blackboards or whatever they are. So the students know that this is a safe place to go to come out. Take time to listen and don't guess what they have to say. So they might be dancing around the issue or subject for a while. So just be positive and affirm them when they disclose that they're in a safe place and that they're okay. If they say something like, you know, I amn't normal, or I, for want of a better word, I kick with the other foot, or, you know, they come out in code. You know, when I was a kid, when you say you kick with the other foot, that could mean you're either Protestant or gay. And so it was just, Ireland was just so whitewashed Catholic at the time. So just if they come out in code, just, you might want to ask them just to clarify it. And don't try and guess it, just ask them to be clear about it. Thank them for trusting you and reassure them that you respect them and that you keep the disclosure private. Again, unless you feel they're in a safety sensitive situation in around suicidal thoughts or self-harming, something like that. And again, just to maybe reassure them that they're perfectly normal and about 700 million other people just like them on Earth. and that number is probably nearly up to 800 million now, because we've added about 1 billion since I was kind of looking at the stats. Acknowledge that it's a huge step for them, that, you know, then you realize how important the conversation is, you know, and plan the next steps in relation to disclosure. They may want to tell their parents, they may want you to help them tell their parents, and that's okay. And so just ask them what they need from you, and that maybe link them in with some of the youth groups that belong to. I have a list of those at the end of the talk. Like that, I know we're going to try and get through this in about an hour, so I'll get through as many slides as I can, and whatever we don't get to, they'll be on the PDF. You can offer to meet them again the next day if possible. So if you're in a school setting, that should be quite easy to do. Or if you're a relative or family friend or neighbor or sports coach or whatever it is. And then kind of set up a regular meeting. You know, they've obviously seen you as the one good adult in their life whom they can trust, and, you know, provide whatever continuity of care they need on their journey. And respect the fact that they won't need you to constantly check in to say, how is the whole coming out process going? How are you getting on with it? There's a time when they just want to fly solo and let them at it, and they let you know what they need. When we look at schools specifically, it's very good for teachers to kind of verbalize their acceptance of LGBT people by including that kind of language in the talk as they're speaking in the class, to include, not to assume, as we say, heteronormity for everything. It's really important to have literature like these stand-up weeks. Stand-up is a week that happens every November, and they'll have different pictures every year. And just to have those posters around the school. And I often think those posters are not necessarily for the out and loud and proud LGBT people, although at least they will know that they have allies in the school. But if you take a 12 or 13-year-old first year coming in, who's maybe from a very conservative background and doesn't feel that they'll ever belong anywhere with their sexuality or gender identity, at least they'll know here in this school, they will be accepted, or they will be seen, or they will be heard, or that they're valid, and that they're valid human beings with their sexuality and their gender identity. Using positive language in the conversation, again, no heteronormative assumptions. And then policies in around anti-bullying, specifically around LGBT and transgender issues, and that LGBT are included in the religious and sexual, or relationship and sexual education. That was a slip up there, actually. It is interesting that a lot of that RSE was done by religious organizations. So slowly that element of thing is coming out, just in that separation of church and state. And if it is being done in your school by a religious organization, please ensure that somebody covers the LGBT stuff afterwards or during it or somewhere around it if they won't. And then, like I was saying, the stand-up week is an important week where schools will hang the rainbow flags around the place, or they'll maybe paint a rainbow zebra crossing for the week, or maybe leave it there for the whole year. Or we had our wristbands that people kept on for the whole year. Actually, we gave one out to each student with the rainbow colors and all that kind of stuff. So each school comes up with their own thing. These are a couple of posters that are out quite a while, actually. And it's just interesting. They're up around all the schools, and they're literally just awareness posters. And I suppose you say, oh, well, I can tell which one is which, but actually you can't. And that's the message. You don't know which person is gay, and it actually doesn't matter. Actually, when I first put those posters up in a couple of schools it used to last about a week, and they'd be all torn down. I'm not sure by who. And it was the same when I did it in another school, and the very same thing happened. And then we put them back up, and it lasted about a month. And then they'd eventually be down. But now actually they go up and they stay up. And that's just it. It was just very interesting that exactly the same process happened in two schools that I was involved with. So fostering acceptance in schools then, again, getting in people to talk to the youth around LGBT issues, and also to the staff, and make sure that the support services, you know, the councils have had the belong to training for around LGBT issues. Resource materials in the libraries and public areas, again, books and coming out guides and posters and all of that kind of stuff is important that people can access them. Workshops for staff, as I mentioned, and So to avoid complacency, you know, again, like I was saying, the referendum is done, everything is fine, and for LGBT people, but the suicide rate and self-harm rates are still at an alarming level. So we need to ensure we never get complacent about it. So yeah, that's just another kind of, I suppose, just any post around the school where somebody says you're welcome here and you're valid. So we're just half an hour in. I just want everyone to take a stretch. We get stiff sitting at screens and Zooms, and this is crowdcast, I think, and just need to remind ourselves that our bodies need to move every once in a while. So feel free yourself to walk around the room or take a stretch or do whatever you need to do there just to break the half hour. So this was another really interesting one because even when I wrote the book, I remember trying to deal with issues around transgender, and now I feel wholly inadequate at that time with the language I used, with terminology I used, but as I was researching it, I thought this was an excellent kind of sign just to kind of help to explain that gender is here and not there, and that's the biggest challenge that people have, you know, for themselves as they come to terms with things, and then for others to try and understand it. So TENI, the Transgender Equality Network of Ireland, have some very good material in and around issues for trans students. So these are just some of the general kind of guidelines around how we can best support somebody who is transgender. And it's respect for the pronoun and issues around respect around uniforms and hair and jewellery and toilets and changing rooms and inclusions in sports and policies around non-binary students and students who are in transition and around their body changes and alterations and those kind of things. And for somebody who's just kind of, I suppose, new to this whole area and this world, you're probably thinking, oh my God, I never get my head around all that. That's way too much stuff. I can't actually deal with all of that. I'm trying to talk with uniforms, talking with hair, and talking with jewellery and all that. Don't worry, you've plenty of time. Take it at your own time. Take in what you can. To talk like this will probably stress you out because, you know, you're going to be like, my God, this guy is talking about pronouns and neo-pronouns and now all of these things. And there's a few more to come. And so don't worry. It's just look at it as kind of an interesting process for you to come to terms with the person in your life that you're supporting, or you yourself if you're exploring this kind of newly for yourself. There is no right and wrong way to do it. There is no, there's no exam at the end of it. And as all you can do is just say, okay, look, there's all that stuff there, right? I wasn't aware of that, I wasn't aware of that. That's fine. You come to terms with all of it as you come along. And you'll come to your own opinions around all of this as you go along too. I'll just give you the information and you absorb what you can and just revisit it and just get up and watch some movies and attend some seminars and conferences and talks and all of the different organizations run all kinds of awareness events. Schools will. So just take your time, don't get overwhelmed with it. It's all fine. You come to terms. I've been a few years at it and I learn new terms every day. And I also mess up on language from time to time. And, you know, young people are not shy about telling you when you mess up. And that's okay. And I take it on the chin and I realize I've messed up. I'm sure I've already messed up something along this talk and somebody will have a view, but I better tell that fella he's using the wrong whatever. And that's okay. And I'm open to that. And I'm open to learning all the time because there's so much to learn. So again, just other considerations, bring in speakers, have awareness exercises, include trans issues in class lessons and anti-bullying things. And then, you know, there might be a champion in the school that can liaise with parents if they need it, you know, to try and understand things for their trans children or other teachers maybe around having trans students. And then, of course, requests for confidentiality because, you know, the child might tell you about how they feel about their gender, sexuality, but that doesn't give you the right to broadcast that, certainly not to anybody without their permission, you know. And then everyone goes at their own pace. and that's okay. You're going at your pace too. Any agencies then that are offering supports to LGBT plus and ASD people, you know, they need to be respectful of contact and personal space, particularly for, this is, I suppose, specifically around people who have ASD as well, or neurodiverse, any neurodiversity. Be clear about what you and your organisation can and cannot offer, the clear clarity around boundaries of confidentiality, and outline the process as best, because neurodiverse people like clarity and they don't like ambiguity around anything. And try, if there's going to be any changes to the plan, to give as much notice as possible. And just be aware that this person may have a higher sense of anxiety than other teens, and so may not be, you know, you might say just go and join that group. That just might be way too anxiety inducing for some people who are neurodiverse. And this sheet is also come out in America, and it was only last year, so I think it's a useful document, and we're going to send that out to you after the talk. A couple of things from it were just more likely that neurodiverse people will express being part of the LGBTQA plus community, and the reason they felt is, you know, that well, we'll come to that on the next slide actually, but there is a lot of commonalities between the kind of coming out twice process. People who are neurodiverse may have less awareness around kind of societal pressure to conform, and they tend to be realists, and they tend to be maybe less fearful of judgments, or perhaps they're too used to judgments and don't care anymore because of their neurodiversity or their LGBT, so whichever one they're coming to terms with. Yeah. So additional challenges then, a lot of people who are neurodiverse tend to be perfectionists, so they might have a greater sense of urgency to affirm their gender identity, so they know there's something going on and they might be a little more anxious about it than another teen. They might just be comfortable to actively explore a fluidity in terms of either sexuality or gender. With their neurodiversity, they may already kind of feel out of touch with neurotypical society, and then more likely to explore their gender or sexual orientation, because they might just feel at odds with neurotypical society. So this is something that they're exploring as being the reason for it. And then anytime there's multiple oppressive identities, there's a multiple element of anxiety and depression that goes along with that. So when you're supporting them, then just try to not invalidate the exploration or seek to dismiss this as a special interest or symptom of their neurodiversity. Try to be respectful in terms of exploring the process. Some people may find it hard to articulate their feelings, so just to be aware of that. Perhaps writing, perhaps emailing, perhaps texting, and perhaps some artistic endeavor might help them to express themselves. And again, just like you're doing this evening, then you're trying to research and educate yourself on all of this stuff. And then just again, you know, irrespective of what your child is going through, they still have to adhere to the family values, the family moral codes, the curfews, as with all teens, and whatever other issues around consent and all of those things safely that you're teaching all of your children. Again, just validating their mission. Explain that you're trying your best to understand and that you might use the wrong terminology at times. Just glad I did that a couple of minutes ago. But that you mean well. And then explore the communities and all of the different supports that are available to you. So belong to is a youth group for LGBT, it's kind of in the lettering. Any is specifically around transgender. LGBT.ie has a listing of all, I suppose, clubs and societies and anything to do with the LGBT community. And As I Am is an autism and neurodiverse support organisation. Prepare them, you know, whomever you're supporting, for those who are not going to be understanding about this. Sometimes we'll say, you know, your grandparents may not understand this, but in fact, you'll find sometimes grandparents are the first to understand it and accept it. And so there is no specific grouping within society that we have to prepare them for, because it could be anybody. Help them to explore the next steps and options. And then like use any everyday opportunities. Like if there is somebody with, say, a neurodiversity or an LGBT person who's on the television and maybe they're in a relationship, yeah, it's not great now that they have found a partner, or that they're moving in together, or that they're getting married, or that on first dates there are, you know, these people are on that soap opera, there are these other people. And so just to show your support by floating stuff out there so that people know they're in safe company. And then instead of kind of all boys do this or all girls do that, just say many or some, so that you're not doing the heteronormative stuff. And then GPs and school counsellors and therapists and stuff should have some kind of material lying around, so when a student comes into them, that they know they're in a safe place to talk about LGBT stuff. This is from that statement again, and just their kind of joint statement is an American grouping. Denying transgender and gender non-conforming autistic people the respect, dignity and equal access to services that they need can worsen the social marginalization that many of them face. And it can have serious health impacts and sometimes result in tragedy. So, you know, that's just, there is a movement in America. It's probably we're a little bit behind here and in Europe on maybe coming together on these things. So that's why I was so pleased to see such a niche kind of talk being given in Sligo, Leitrim and Roscommon in this sensibility series. In terms of school, it's useful to try and identify a champion at the school who will be among the school's staff who can understand these things, and probably your child in the school will help you to identify that person. And encourage schools to develop policies around LGBT issues. And when you're talking about to your child, you know, try not use specific questions, you know, so you might like, do you like anyone at school, as opposed to, oh, do you fancy any girls at school, or do you fancy any boys at school? Puberty, difficult. I know I'm kind of flashing through the things here, but I do want to try and leave a little bit of time at the end for questions. So puberty can be a very triggering experience, of course. So a female identified developing in a male form, so the issues they're going to have, you know, for all of them, there's a whole bunch of stuff that has to be considered, you know, facial hair, voice, muscle tone, bone structure, all of those kind of things. Breasts, menstruation, again, voice. So a lot of these things can cause huge amount of stresses for young people. And I mean, teenage life is so difficult already, you know. I was saying it to a mother earlier today, you know. I often thought maybe we should just put all 12-year-olds into an induced coma and feed them geography and history and maths and French and all the Irish, whatever it is, into headphones, and wake them up when they're 19 and let them off out into the world and just bypass all of this puberty stuff, because it's just so messy. And obviously I don't believe that, but it's just so messy and difficult and challenging, and particularly in around that age 15 is a really, really, really tricky time. So please be aware of just all of the things. So on top of all of the normal stressors of teenage life, some people have to deal with and the LGBT and or both. So it's tricky stuff, you know. So one of the issues then, just to observe things around mental health issues, can result in all of the masking and all of the challenges around acceptance or rejection, or having to fight for your rights and fight for your acceptance. So self-harm often plays a significant part, and suicidality is an issue there too. So it's just important for us all to keep those things in mind as we try and support the people in their lives who are going through all this stuff. So some people will go through kind of, you know, the full transition, you know, physically, but others won't actually go through that. And so it might just include social, physical, or legal challenges, a challenge on coming out, the physical appearance, changing the name, the pronoun, their sex designation on legal documents. And if they decide to go through surgery, then they have to seek the medical assistance. And again, all of that is through your GP, who will refer you to the people who can do the assessments and put your child forward for the necessary plan. So again, you know, if the students in school, is important, you know, that staff have realistic expectation of what it might look like for a child to change their pronoun. They can decide between themselves, the parents and the student, about informing other students or changing the name on the roll call, and then deciding around uniforms, bathrooms, and changing facilities. Schools must act on this. It's protected under the Equal Status Act 2015 and Employment and Equality Act 2015 again. And it's protected on both the gender and disability grounds. So the gender ground is an EU directive, and a person cannot be subject to less favourable treatment because of their gender identity than someone who is not transgender. And the disability ground is around physical and psychological conditions, or gender dysphoria. It's recognised as a medical condition. So again, that's why I'm suggesting you keep your GP in on this, and that's your first protocol for all health, physical and emotional and psychological. And there are obligations then on service providers to provide reasonable accommodations. And it's not the function of the school to ascertain whether or not the student is transgender or which gender. They have to roll with the identified gender. And then families, you know, of course, families are going to experience many emotions, you know, and in fact, if you look at the emotions there, it's almost like a grieving process, because, you know, there might be initial denial, anger, bargaining. All of those things will feel familiar because, you know, you might mourn the loss of the son or daughter, and then at the same time deal with the gaining of a son or daughter, or a non-binary person. So again, just like grief, people experience it differently, and the duration can be different for each family member. And keep this in mind if a family in your school community is experiencing this. So maybe it mightn't even be in your community or in your immediate family, but somebody else who's going through it. So of course, we had the referendum in 2015, and just these are, again, just some of the things that we should consider. Just the visibility is really important in schools, in surgeries, in therapy offices, wherever it is, so that people feel safe. Schools should try and offer a safe space where they can, because maybe that's for a small support group, although Belong to kind of feel that schools shouldn't maybe provide a specific LGBT club, that you should direct them to their local Belong to group, and they just, I suppose, Belong to feel that maybe not every school is equipped with the right person to deal with all that can go on there. You know, therapists should be able to provide all kinds of different resources to the students that come into them. How can we be good trans allies, I suppose, to use the correct terminology, respect which name and pronoun a person would like to use. And like that, you know, I would say to a student, you know, if they're not out to the whole school, let's say, well, look, when I do come to you to collect you from the class, I will be using your current name on the roll, and then when we're in the session, we can use your chosen name and your chosen, and they know that because they have decided not to come out yet. So it's just to kind of reassure them, you know, about privacy and what have you. So again, we're kind of going over the same kind of stuff there. Just make sure that your school has things specifically in around bullying, bullying policies that mention LGBT and trans. And then we need to call out people for any remarks, jokes, slagging on the corridors or anything else. And we have found certainly visibility of posters for that very good in the schools. And then we get the SPHE teachers, or the CSB or SPHE, I can't remember, I think it's SPHE, to cover LGBT and trans issues, certainly at one point throughout the year for, you know, age appropriate material. And then we all, professionals or teachers or parents or friends, all need to look at our own conscious and subconscious, our unconscious biases, because we all pick up stuff along life's path that form our opinions. And then when we have to have a bit of a paradigm shift, we have to just be aware of our biases. Yeah, and just look, if you set out to treat everyone with respect and dignity, they will pick up on that, irrespective of whether you get the language wrong, you know. So I just thought this was kind of nice to tidy up things as we get to the end of the talk, just to kind of, you know, that there's actually a lot of commonalities between neurodiversity, because neurodiversity has the rainbow in their symbol, and the LGBT plus community has that. So it's just interesting that there's a huge amount of crossover in both. The people in Roscommon, there's a parent group in Roscommon, I'll put up their stuff in a minute there. We're involved in putting this together. So it's a really good booklet. And again, that's going to be emailed out to you. This is going to be emailed out to you as well. It's just coming out as you. It's a coming out booklet from Belong To, and there's a guide for parents. And that's again in the pack that will be emailed out to you. I think the one on the left is too big, so I don't think I've sent that, but you can, it's probably more for teachers that they can download these resources if they need to. They're all on the department's website, or you get them on the Belong To website. TLC, I think it's Tishmahori. My Irish is not great, but it's Tishmahori Lekela, which is parents coming together. And I was just saying before we started, you know, that Roscommon often get a bad rep for being the kind of red dot on the map. But to be fair to Roscommon, they weren't actually the only red dots on the map, but they were just in that constituency. Both constituencies voted against the referendum, and I know there was a brilliant team up in Roscommon actually, and they're just immigration had taken an awful lot of people away, and they just didn't have the youth kind of footfall to kind of get to all the doors and everything. But I think like Monaghan might have voted no, and Cavan pulled them across, and I think Laois voted no, and Offaly pulled them across. So Roscommon are not on their own. There's a lot of, even in my own town, I happened to see the box tally, and there was two boxes in my village, and one had voted no by 5, and the other voted 10 by yes, and they just pulled it across. So Roscommon, you weren't on your own on this. It was just unfortunate that one couldn't pull the other across. So Tishmahori Lekela, a brilliant parent group down in Roscommon, who have a lot of materials, and so they have helplines and that kind of thing. And then Belong To, that's their details. Again, these will all be on the PDF that you'll get out. So at 2022, I didn't do too bad, I think, to get to that. I'm just going to leave my details up there for a minute, and then I'll stop sharing, and we'll have maybe just a chat if there's any questions have come in. Yeah. So again, those will be on the. Just take a screenshot maybe if you're on your laptop or something like that, and you can come back to that.
That's great, Michael. Fair play.
We okay, Ulton?
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Stop sharing there then.
Lovely stuff. Just thanks very much, Michael. That was really informative. Now there's a lot of information there that you wouldn't come across readily at all. There's a few questions that are coming in. I'd just like to mention to anyone that maybe if anyone came in late, the ask a question option is at the bottom of the screen. You can click on that and put in your question, or if there's a question already in there that you think is informative for yourself, you can just vote on it and it'll sort of push it up the pecking order. But I'll jump in here straight away, Michael, and the first one I'll look at here is, would you say where parents want to support their neurodiverse and LGBT plus teen, the LGBT plus issues tend to be shelved while they deal with the neurodiversity issues?
It's a good one, actually. It's a good question. I guess either could be shelved. And again, culturally, it can be. I suppose it depends on whether the LGBT might be shelved because in some ways it doesn't kind of need to be maybe dealt with, whereas with the neurodiversity, you might actually have to get therapy or link in with services And so possibly the LGBT, it's more, you don't necessarily have to link in with services, because you don't actually need, well, to be honest, you don't need therapy for neurodiversity, and you don't need therapy for LGBT issues, but it's the anxiety that comes with them that requires the support. But with the ASD, you may need occupational therapists, and you may need speech and language therapists, whereas the LGBT stuff doesn't have maybe specific medical services that are required. So yeah, it's probably a really good point to say the LGBT stuff gets kind of pushed to the side while the neurodiversity is dealt with. Yeah.
Okay. Another question in is, how common is it for siblings to both be transgender?
Well, I'd lie now if I said I had the answer to that question. Anecdotally, I have never come across, personally, but I mean, I'm not an expert in the field. I'd be happy if that person was to email me. I will try and find it out for them, because I don't want to pretend I know. Personally, I just have never come across more than one transgender child. I've often come across more than one LGBT child or lesbian, gay, bisexual, but not transgender in the family.
Okay.
It's a very interesting question, and yeah, I'd be curious to know myself, actually, yeah, how prevalent it is. I'd imagine not as prevalent as having two or more LGBT people in the family.
Okay. I'd just like to remind people too that we'll be sharing all of Michael's information on the three respective websites, Roscommon, Sligo and Leitrim, and we'll be emailing all the participants tonight with the links for them. So Michael's details will be there too if anyone did want to get on to him directly. I think that's okay, Michael, you were saying there.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Great stuff.
And if somebody wanted the book, by the way, the book that I mentioned there, I'm really not a commercial guy. If you email me directly, I'll send you a PDF of the book. You know, I think it's just, the PDF is probably just too big to share with all of that other resource. But if somebody wanted it, I'm perfectly happy to share it for free. Yeah, I'm just, my mission in the book was not to try and make money or anything like that. It was just to get the message out. So if somebody wants it, just get in touch with me.
Great. Another question is, do you think intersectionality is an important way forward in advocating for LGBT plus and neurodiverse people?
Yes, this came up a little while ago, you know, and genders and sexualities, and just read the actual question to me again there, Ulton.
I will shortly. Do you think intersectionality is an important way forward in advocating for LGBTI plus and neurodiverse people?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's probably the more kind of alliances we can make, and we'll probably start finding, you know, a good sense of kind of intersectionality kind of coming where different groups can come together and do more research and do more awareness maybe. And because, as we were saying earlier, the prevalence of LGBT identities within the neurodiverse community is much higher than in the neurotypical community. For those reasons we mentioned, it's I think people who are neurodiverse are just more open, more honest, more willing to explore, more real. So yeah, I think it is the way forward. Yeah.
Okay. If your neurodiverse LGBT plus teenager is experiencing mental health issues, would a specialist counsellor or service be recommended? And is there a list of these available for Ireland?
My sense is, I don't think there's a specific list of neurodiverse and LGBT therapists. You know, there's a list of therapists on the As I Am website. There's a list of therapists on the Aspire Ireland website. There's a list of therapists on the As I Am on the available on lgbt.ie, as far as I know, and Belong to have a list of services and mental health services, and Spun Out and Reach Out and they all have good mental health stuff, but have they specific therapists? I'm not quite sure. IACP.ie are a list of accredited therapists in Ireland, and that's the Irish Association of Counsellors and Psychotherapists. And you can search under subgroups within that. So you can put in the keywords of, say, neurodiversity and LGBT, and that'll give you a filter down of the therapists who work there, and you can find them geographically as well. So IACP probably the biggest range of therapists in Ireland, and yeah, just use the filters, and then just look on the specific websites.
Okay. Another question. This might be more relating to the actual series than tonight, but it's curious as autism is mentioned. Why is there a link?
Well, yeah, I mean, I probably used the word autism instead of neurodiversity in some of what I was doing. Maybe that was where my head was at the time, and I probably just should have said neurodiversity as I went along. But autism is considered one of the neurodiversities, including ADHD and ADD and some other more niche conditions, or, well, nobody likes to use the word disorder, but autism spectrum disorder comes in, but I think that word will change hopefully soon. So the reason we probably use neurodiversity more now than anything is that an awful lot of the other labels have medical kind of attachments to them, like disorders and conditions, that kind of stuff, and it just doesn't feel comfortable. So as a kind of a broader umbrella, we tend to use neurodiversity now, but like that, it's a little bit like the word Asperger will sometimes slide into the autism discussions and topics, whereas that word is, well, some people still identify with it, and that's fine, but it's not used clinically anymore as a diagnosis. So autism is one of the neurodiversities. That's where the link is.
Great. And the last question, by the looks of it for tonight, Michael, is there a long wait for a referral to services from a GP?
Yes, as far as I know. Now, COVID has kind of messed with that process, because nobody was being seen for quite a while. As far as I know, things are loosening up there, but just anecdotally, what I would have heard from parents is that they've been waiting 6 months or so, which, you know, in a young person's life, it's actually quite a long time. So I'm hoping it hasn't gone up by much more than that. I haven't heard that it has gone up much more than that. So I'd say 6 months is probably my best guesstimate around that at the minute.
Okay. There's a few comments in, Michael, just thanking you for your talk. Just it was very informative, and it was great evening. So thanks very much. And I suppose just on behalf of ourselves here with the Sensibility Project and the 3 counties, Sligo, Leitrim, Roscommon, and everyone that was here tonight, actually, there's a good considerable crowd in looking in tonight. So we'd just like to thank you very much for the night. And
great, yeah, my pleasure.
Great.
And thanks to everyone for look. It was such a beautiful night, certainly here in Dublin. That I was kind of thinking if I was looking at this topic, I'll probably record it and I go out for my walk and I'll hit it on a damp or a dark time instead of this evening. So fair dues to anyone who looked in tonight live. Yeah, thank you.
Great stuff. Okay, well, we leave it at that, folks. So enjoy the night, the rest of it, and we might see you for another talk in the remainder of the series. Thanks very much. Good night.